Dr. Roy Eidelson is a psychologist and the author of the new book, Political Mind Games, How the 1% Manipulate Our Understanding of What's Happening, What's Right, and What's Possible. There's a direct link in our program to his book. Please go ahead and make sure to get that book. You want to understand the pathology that is occurring right now. Understand it from someone who knows, who's studied these types of mental frameworks, if you will. The former executive director of the University of Pennsylvania Solomon Asch Center for Study of Ethnopolitical Conflict, a past president of Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and a member of the Coalition of the Ethical Psychology. In his current work, Roy focuses on applying psychological knowledge to issues of social justice and political change. His writing has appeared in a variety of scholarly journals and other outlets, including the Washington Post and Los Angeles Times. You can follow him online at www.royeidelson.com, and his Twitter is at Roy Eidelson. The blog of the week is the most prescient article Dr. Eidelson wrote, titled Authoritarians, Plutocrats, and the Fight for Racial Justice. It is it is a must-read article, not just for progressives, but for one's right-wing friends. Yes, and I have a whole lot of right-wing friends right here in my town, and they're Dr. Eidelson, they're actually pretty good friends of mine. So we follow the protocol. Anyhow, it is a must-read article, not just for progressives, but for your right-wing friends. It will plant a seed. I guarantee you. Even we have quite a few right-wingers in our Facebook page here as well that are consistent listeners as well. I am sure you will be planting a seed in your heads as well. I won't read it as we have the author with us. So again, Dr. Eidelson, it's my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right. And secondly, thank you for writing that most prescient article.
Thank you very much.
Now, I really like the way you started the article. So tell me, first of all, what was the genesis of this particular article? Because I read a couple of other things from you, and this seemed sort of to the punch, if you will.
Well, I've been focused on these issues for a while, but I was struck by what's been going on with the National Football League. I happen to be from Philadelphia, so, you know,
the Eagles,
first-time Super Bowl champions. Yeah, perhaps a little more attention as a result, but it was striking to see what owners had decided was the solution to their problem, which, you know, basically oversimplifying, you know, players may not kneel, if they're going to be on the field for the national anthem, they have to stand and behave respectfully. If they want to stay in the locker room, that's okay. So essentially, they caved in to what Donald Trump was pushing, going back to when he was calling players SOBs and demanding that they stand for the national anthem. And what he also did, effectively, unfortunately, is he misrepresented what the kneeling was about. It was a protest against racial injustice and police brutality, and he painted it as an expression of a lack of patriotism or opposition to what makes America great. And that's obviously, clearly not what it was about, but that rung true for many of his supporters, who then kind of came out in opposition to these players, in opposition to the NFL. Apparently attendance was down noticeably this year, and people attribute it, at least in part, to these protests. And the NFL owners had a choice to make, whether they would support the players' entirely legitimate concerns, whether they would support free speech, or whether, because ultimately what they seem to care most about is making money, or at least that would be true for most of them, they caved in to the president and came up with a policy that just seemed really wrong to a lot of people, including me. And that led to this article, which it focuses more on issues of how authoritarianism can line up with plutocracy or control by the 1%.
Now,
and I'm happy to say more about that.
Yeah, you mentioned, I want to explore something. You mentioned something called manipulative appeals. Explain that.
The focus of my book, Political Mind Games, is how the 1% target our deepest concerns and thereby manipulate us into believing things that aren't true. And as I lay out in the book, all of us, or let's say most of us, have 5 core concerns that govern our lives in one way or another. And those concerns, each has a question associated with it. One concern is vulnerability. Are we safe? So we're very sensitive to information or arguments that suggest we are or are not safe. The second one is injustice. Are we being treated fairly? Here, too, we're deeply concerned about issues of injustice. We think that such injustices should be addressed, but we can be misled about what's fair or unfair by those who have an ulterior motive. Third is, who can we trust in the world? And for this one, we tend to divide the world into those people we believe are trustworthy and those we think are not. And if we get it right, that's really good. But again, we can be deceived into trusting the wrong people. Fourth core concern is superiority. Are we good enough, is the question we ask. We compare ourselves to others. We're looking for respect and admiration. And we will be responsive to efforts to kind of persuade us that we're good, that they are bad, they being outsiders in one way or another. And it can lead us to paint people in the worst light possible simply because they're different from us. And the fifth concern is helplessness. Can we control what happens to us? And here, too, if we feel that we don't have control over our lives, we become helpless, we become resigned to our fate, and it destroys any chance for personal or collective accomplishment. So with those 5 concerns, the 1% develop what I call mind games or manipulative appeals to make us believe things that aren't true. So, for example, they may tell us that change is dangerous. That would be a vulnerability mind game. They may tell us that they are the victims. That's an injustice mind game. They may tell us that they, kind of outsiders, people who are different, cannot be trusted. Another mind game about distrust. They may argue that what they're doing has a higher moral purpose. That's a superiority mind game. And in terms of helplessness, one of the mind games is don't blame us. Despite the power and control the 1% have, they're quick to say, well, there was nothing we could do when things go wrong. Those are just examples, but that's the context in which I refer to those manipulative appeals.
Now, Dr. Eidelson, let me ask the question this way. Do you believe that the plutocracy, our oligarchy, if you will, initially, let's say subliminally wanted a Donald Trump in power? Is that something that maybe you're alluding to at all?
There are plutocrats who wanted Donald Trump in power for particular reasons, which is that he was likely to help them advance a self-interested agenda, which is basically greater wealth and greater power for them, less financial security and less influence for everyone else. A lot of the people who wanted him in power, though, are, what I refer to as authoritarian followers. Much is said and written about how Donald Trump himself fits the mold of an authoritarian leader. But I think it's really important to recognize that authoritarian leaders get nowhere without followers. And there is an authoritarian style that we see in people who follow such leaders. And as I try and explain in the article, there are three characteristics that kind of capture what it means to be an authoritarian follower. First is submission to the leader. So we all tend to be deferential to authority, but authoritarian submission is much more extreme than that. Basically, I mean, it reaches the point of doing whatever the group leader says. So that's authoritarian submission. That's one. The second of the three is authoritarian aggression. And that's a follower who's ready to fight, attack, whatever it takes to defend the leader, whatever that leader may or may not be trying to accomplish. And the third is conventionalism. And authoritarian followers believe everybody should follow the norms and customs that the leader promotes as most important. So it's those qualities, the authoritarian follower, that helped put Trump in office. You can be an authoritarian follower without subscribing to one political view or another, in theory. But recent surveys indicate that roughly 3/4 of all authoritarian followers in the United States tend to lean Republican. So they were an important base of support for Trump, and they liked his message, which was essentially, I'm going to bring back law and order. I'm going to make this country great. We're going to return to the traditions and values that have dissipated or diminished. And it didn't matter whether that was true or what his motivation was. People bought it. They voted for him. And that's what they want from him. And this is a substantial block of American voters. And they also were undoubtedly very happy with his approach to the NFL controversy. He was appealing to that base when he lashed out at players who were, again, entirely legitimately protesting some very serious problems in our country.
Do you think that he planned this? Do you think he came about this by accident? Do you really think he has the intellect to have known all these stages or these breakdowns that you've been speaking about?
I don't think he necessarily carefully and in a calculating way did this, but I think he had an understanding of it. I think he had people working with him who are masters of propaganda. And the 5 core concerns I mentioned, they're not unusual, they're not hidden, they're not secret. In fact, they're the same concerns that I believe progressives should be appealing to advance the common good. The problem is plutocrats use these targets in order to advance only their own interests. And what Trump was able to do was take advantage of the racism that's undeniably part of this country. There's no escaping it. And we should recognize it is possible to make big money, huge money, through racism and bigotry. And what that involves is racism being used strategically. So that's essentially what happens if someone like Trump takes advantage of the public's prejudices in order to gain office or power, and then uses that office or power against his own economic interests and the other 1%. So regardless of the extent to which he himself is a racist, and he clearly seems to be, he can still use the racism in the country to advance the 1%'s aspiration. And we see this, just to give 3 quick examples. We see it in regard to mass incarceration, especially of Black Americans. Okay, that mass incarceration boosts the bottom line of numerous large corporations who are involved in the provision of food in prisons, or control the telephone use in prisons, or the health care in prisons. It's not just Black Americans. It happens from, you can get rich from the inhumane treatment of undocumented immigrants. Where do these people end up? Many of them end up in private prisons, which is a growth industry. And then third, the same dynamic works against Muslims and Muslim Americans. So you can make money. There are people who make money from the idea of a travel ban for Muslims and related efforts to portray Muslims as terrorists. And who wins here? Well, billions of dollars go to private defense contractors and intelligence-related agencies who prey on our fears in just this way. So it's an ugly situation when authoritarian, and one of the ugly outcomes is the preservation of the racial injustice that's so prevalent today.
Now, two more questions. The first one is, do you think Trump is changing the mindset of America, let's say with respect to race, making America more racist or not? Secondly, do you think that, second question to end this is, do you think, where do we go from here? So let's go with the first one first. Do you think he's actually changing one's mindset? And secondly, where do we go from here?
Well, in regard to the first, I think what's more likely is that he's giving Americans who lean toward being prejudiced more comfort, more support. He's activating their racist tendencies. I'm not sure that he's creating new racists in the country, fortunately, but we need to fight back against that regardless, which is part of what fighting against these mind games. That's why it's so important. So he's definitely emboldening those who have racist inclinations, and we're seeing that in any number of ways. And the second question?
The second question is, where do we go from here? I mean, you've identified how Trump came to be, how the plutocracy can actually make use of who he is to advance themselves, and it's something that you covered in detail in your new book. So my question I know you probably have this in the book, but where do we go from here? How do we mitigate what Trump has unleashed? Well, not what Trump has unleashed. I like to say what the Republicans started and Trump simply instantiated, if you will.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't. These are problems that have been developing for a long time and issues that haven't been adequately addressed. It's not. They didn't just start when Trump was elected a year and a half ago. In terms of where we go, what I think is really important is that we learn to confront and debunk the mind games that mislead people in the ways I've described. People will change their minds if they understand that, if they better understand the motives of those who are misleading them and come to realize that those tales are driven by self-interest, if they better understand what is wrong with those arguments that are presented, if they better understand that Trump and others are trying to appeal to their emotions so that we won't use our critical reasoning powers to figure out that we're being misled, that's how they win. So there's a method by which we can confront and hold the ground against these mind games. And it basically involves what's called psychological attitude inoculation. So just to clearly describe it in a public health model, just like you get a flu shot, when you get a flu shot, you're getting a little bit of that virus so that you develop antibodies. And those antibodies will then help you fight off the full-blown virus if you come upon it when you're going about your daily life. In the same way, if we are prepared to deal with the lies and distortions that the 1% and Trump in particular bring our way, if we know in advance they're coming at us, this is what they're going to try and argue, this is why that's not true, and this is why they are pushing it in order to enrich themselves, then research shows we're better able to withstand those appeals and hold our ground, and we're better prepared to help other people do the same. We got to engage in conversations. We have to be out there kind of fighting for a progressive vision, and at the same time being willing to engage with and explore the views of those who don't share our own.
Dr. Roy Eidelson, psychologist and author of the book Political Mind Games, How the 1% Manipulate Our Understanding of What's Happening, What's Right, and What's Possible. The link is on the blog post. Go get the book. Dr. Eidelson, it was my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right. Thank you so kindly for coming on and speaking about your article and subsequently about your book.